Let's jump right into this comprehensive explainer on data management. We're going to break down the absolute essentials, the key questions, model answers, and core concepts you need to really master this topic. We'll be starting from foundational definitions and working our way all the way up to complex digital infrastructure and legal protection.
Section 1. Principles and Process. Okay, let's dive right into this and establish our foundational framework. Before we can even look at complex software or legal agreements, we absolutely have to understand the fundamental ways an organization manages its information.
So, the very first essential question we need to ask is straightforward. What is data management? What we're really looking for here is the foundational definition and the primary goals of handling organizational information. I mean, why do we do this in the first place?
Well, the concise model answer looks like this. Data management is the development, execution, and supervision of plans, policies, programs, and practices. These are specifically designed to control, protect, deliver, and ultimately enhance the value of information assets. The absolute crucial takeaway here is that this isn't just some passive storage vault. It's an active, ongoing life cycle strictly meant to maximize asset value.
You'll definitely want to lock in this exact professional terminology. Just remember the active verbs: develop, execute, supervise, control, protect, deliver, and enhance. Grasping this definition immediately suggests a really logical follow-up. If this is our big goal, how do we actively manage this day to day?
And that brings us to our next critical question. What methodologies can be used to manage data? This question is really asking for the specific procedural steps an organization takes, moving all the way from the initial data collection to the final communication of that data.
A highly solid model answer outlines a strictly structured, sequential workflow. First, you develop and elaborate a log frame matrix. Then, you collect data samples, record them, and collate them. From there, you analyze the data, communicate the results, and manage the ongoing information, feedback, and dissemination. The key concept here is that effective data management relies entirely on a strict, repeatable sequence of events.
The critical professional terminology to highlight right here is the log frame matrix. This is literally your starting point for structuring and elaborating information. Now that we understand the methodology and how to structure our workflow, a natural follow-up question pops up. Where exactly are we sourcing all this data that we're feeding into our matrix?
Section 2. Sources and Collection. Let's move to and see how this builds into identifying and utilizing data sources.
Now, we face two closely linked questions. One of the sources of information to obtain data, and what data do you use in your day-to-day work? This requires us to identify both the external and internal origins of data and figure out what that data actually looks like in practice on a daily basis.
For the model answer, your sources should include professional bodies, government publications, the internet, and importantly, people, like colleagues and specialist contractors. As for your day-to-day data, we're talking about material and labor prices, site information, tender prices, and previous project costs. The core concept? Effective data collection is a balancing act between external industry metrics and internal site records.
Make sure to highlight tender prices and previous project cost information as your key professional terminology when describing daily operational data. Knowing this massive volume of financial and site data exists immediately prompts a critical follow-up question. What digital platforms do we use to handle these complex tender prices and site records?
Section 3. EDMS and BIM. Let's shift over and look at the digital infrastructure side of our explainer. The question we must master here is, what are the modern data management systems available? To answer this, we simply need to look at the current recognized software platforms utilized across the industry for managing project information.
A concise model answer includes platforms like Building Information Modeling, or BIM, Primavera Expedition, Aconex, eBuilder, Doors, and iConnect. And this brilliantly illustrates the industry's massive shift. The key takeaway is that we no longer rely on fragmented files. We rely on massive, comprehensive ecosystems to house our data.
The absolute most prominent professional terminology to isolate for your retention here is Building Information Modeling, or BIM. It is a cornerstone of modern digital management. But placing all this critical day-to-day financial data and tender pricing into massive centralized systems poses a severe risk. So the urgent follow-up question we must ask is, how do we legally protect the data inside these massive systems?
Section 4. Protection and NDAs. Let's shift our focus to the critical area of keeping our digital and physical assets contractually secure.
This brings up a pretty complex multi-part question. What data needs protection, why, and how do you ensure unauthorized issue is prevented? This is really asking for two main things: the core business rationale behind maintaining security and the specific contractual mechanism you use to enforce it.
Here is the model answer. First, you absolutely must protect company-critical information, which includes trade secrets, confidential business plans, and operational security data. Why? Because losing this information means project budgets might not be met, or you might be entirely unable to price the tender. To prevent unauthorized issue, you must ask consultants, engineers, and contractors to enter into a non-disclosure agreement with the client. The key concept you need to convey is that information leaks aren't just some IT problem. They directly threaten project timelines, budgets, and tender viability.
Now, what's really interesting about this is the specific terminology, non-disclosure agreement, or NDA. It perfectly links the legal agreement directly to your operational security. By enforcing an NDA, you are actively managing your data by protecting its ultimate value.
Section 5. Archiving and destruction. Because protecting data isn't just about software and contracts, we also have to look at the physical hardware lifecycle.
A major challenge in data management is actually the physical hardware itself. Organizations constantly replace out-of-date computers, servers, laptops, and copiers just to keep up with technology and enhance productivity. The key lifecycle concept here is that this constant rush to upgrade creates a massive physical disposal risk. You're left with a large number of excess electronics that contain sensitive data, and these must be managed and disposed of properly. It's a physical security risk just as much as a digital one. Section 6. Rapid-fire review. We've covered a whole lot of ground today, from initial methodologies to hardware disposal. Let's jump in and consolidate everything we've covered with a rapid-fire review.
Okay, let's lock this in. What is data management? It is actively controlling, protecting, and enhancing the value of information assets. What management methodologies do we use? We develop a log frame matrix, collate, analyze, and communicate the results. What modern systems are used? We utilize BIM, Primavera, Aconex, eBuilder, and iConnect. And finally, how do you prevent unauthorized issue of critical data? You strictly enforce a non-disclosure agreement, or NDA.
To truly master this topic, you must be incredibly comfortable using the correct terminology: data management, log frame matrix, building information modeling, and non-disclosure agreements. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a provocative thought. If your digital data is perfectly structured inside a massive system like BIM and everyone has signed an NDA, but your company's out-of-date electronics are improperly disposed of, is your project truly secure?